Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf lamed vav. This month's learning is dedicated in memory of Rabbi Dr. Raymond Harari, zichro, on the occasion of his first yahrzeit. Rabbi Harari was my first Gemara teacher and the one who sparked my love for learning Gemara. Over the course of his distinguished career as an educator, as principal of Yeshiva of Flatbush, as a community rabbi, he inspired thousands of students with his wisdom, warmth, and unwavering commitment to Torah. As his wife Vicky beautifully expressed, Rabbi Harari embodied 6 core values that he cultivated with deep intentionality throughout his life: hard work, gratitude, forgiveness, patience, focusing on families and our priorities, and the inclusion of women in halakhic Judaism. Yehi, zichro, baruch. Okay, we're going to get started. I just want to let you know we're starting a new small project of learning Masechet Ta'anit, starting from Zayin Mar Cheshvan, which is the day in Israel that we start asking for rain, pertain talu matav. Ta'anit is all about rain and all about all sorts of stories about people who tried to bring rain. It's a very interesting kind of light Masechet, I would say, probably the lightest of all the Masechtot. And we're doing a campaign to get people to learn the whole Masechet 4 days a week, not every single day, but 4 days a week from basically the middle of next week. I think it starts on Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday through the middle of Hanukkah. So the details will be sent out soon. It'll then be on our homepage, and we'll send through the WhatsApp groups. If you want to encourage, it's a great way to get people to start learning Gemara. Maybe people who haven't learned yet. It's good review for those who learned Ta'anit and want to review it. So it's a nice campaign, the Ta'anit Challenge, and we look forward to having lots of people join the learning. Okay, with that, we're going to get started with our Mishna. Mishna at the bottom of Lamed Hamudbet. Shachato amanat lahaniach et damo uyimurav lemachal. Okay, this sounds a lot like what we've been doing. Although it's yan lechutz, it sounds like pigul, chutz lezmano, chutz lemkomo, but there's one minor difference here. If you remember, the whole pigul is based on achol yachel, right? Im achol yachel, right? If you eat it. Has to be some eating, consumption on the altar, consumption, right? A thought about consuming. Consumption on the altar, consumption by a person. But notice what it says here. You slaughter it, shachato, al minat, with the thought, lahaniach et damo uyimurav lemachal, to leave the blood or the parts you're supposed to go on the altar for tomorrow, or to take them out. So you're basically saying, I'm going to leave it over. Now, leaving it over will disqualify the korban. But a thought about leaving it over shouldn't be a problem because it's missing the consumption word. It's not saying, I'm going to eat it tomorrow, I'm going to put it on the altar tomorrow. You just say, I'm going to leave it till tomorrow, meaning I'm not going to deal with it today, which is obviously going to disqualify the korban if you really do that. But who's to say a thought of that? That's not the classic chutz lezmano, chutz lemkomo, because it's missing what you're going to do with it tomorrow. I'm going to put it on the altar tomorrow. I'm going to eat it tomorrow, or eat it right if it's beyond its time. So Rabbi Yehuda posel. Rabbi Yehuda says this thought is a disqualifying thought. This is pigul also. Chachamim machshirin. The rabbis say no, it's permitted because it's missing the achila, which really what we need to figure out is what's the basis of Rabbi Yehuda for saying this is pigul. Doesn't have the consumption part. Okay, next case. Now we're going to have a slew of cases that if you have a thought about this, it's not pigul. And you'll see why right away. If you say, I have a thought that I'm going to put the blood on the ramp instead of on the altar in the right place, or shalok neged yesod, on the wrong part of the altar. Remember, we already learned this doesn't disqualify the korban, so of course, a thought about it is not going to disqualify the korban, right? On the 2 sides of the mizbeach where there is no base of the altar, right? The yesod only went around on 2 sides. Or you have a thought that you're going to put the blood in the wrong place, right? That the ones that are supposed to go on top, I'm going to put them at the bottom, or any tanim lamata, or if I'm going to put them on the upper, they're supposed to go on the bottom part. My thought is I'm going to put the blood lamala on the upper part. I'm going to bring the blood into the wrong altar, the ones that are supposed to be outside. I have this thought, I'm going to bring them inside to the sanctuary, or the reverse. Because remember, there's 2 altars, and different sacrifices get brought on different altars, right? The blood of the sacrifices. You have a thought that someone who's impure is going to eat it, or someone who's impure is going to sacrifice it, or shiyochluhu arilim, or shikrivuhu arilim, or someone who's uncircumcised, who's also not allowed to eat the meat or sacrifice it, is going to either eat it or sacrifice it. Now, this is a bit of a strange thought, and we're going to talk about this later in the Gemara. The issue with this thought is, I can have a thought that I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, or I'm going to do something wrong, right? But how can I have a thought that someone else is going to do something that's wrong? Now, if I have a thought about someone else who's impure is going to eat it, and then, if we say my thought has significance, it's because it could actually happen. But try to imagine the scene. I say I have a thought that someone tamei is going to eat it. Now, how am I going to go find a tamei person who's willing to eat a korban knowing that it's forbidden for them to eat it? So it's really beyond my control to actually make that happen, which weakens this thought. Right? It's one of the reasons why this is not going to be a problem. L'shabel atzmot ha-pesach. Now, you're not allowed to break a bone on the korban pesach, if you remember this halacha. So if you have a thought that I'm slaughtering the pesach, I say, I'm going to break a bone. Or lechol menuna, or I'm going to eat it raw. Now, you're not allowed to eat it raw. You have to eat it roasted. La'arev damo b'dam psulim, or I'm going to mix the blood of the sacrifice with disqualified blood. Kashel, all these thoughts, remember, this isn't you're doing them, you're thinking them. If you think while I'm slaughtering or while I'm putting the blood, right, you think one of these thoughts, then, right, or during the halakha or Kabbalah, any of those, right, she'ein machshava poselet ela b'chutz lizmano b'chutz l'mkomo v'apesach v'achatat shelo lishman. This brings everything back full circle, right, from what we started our Masechet. There's only certain unique cases that disqualify korbanot, and those are, if we start from the end, because that's really where we started our Masechet, Pesach and Chatat Shelo Lishma. Remember, all the other Shelo Lishma, you do it for the sake of the wrong korban, they're not disqualified. The korban could still be brought. Right? They don't fulfill the obligation of the owner, but they could still be brought. But the Pesach and Chatat Shelo Lishma are disqualified. Machshava Chutz Lizmano, I'm going to bring the blood, right, outside the right time, or Chutz L'Mkomo, outside the right place, or the meat, or eat it, right, either on the altar. All those are disqualifying thoughts. Any other thoughts are not disqualifying. Okay, that's like a big summary of everything we've seen. Now we're going to start with trying to figure out Rabbi Yehuda's position. So going back to the beginning of the Mishnah, I have this thought that I'm going to leave the blood, not eat it, but just leave it till tomorrow, or leave it outside of the place it's allowed to be, right? I'm in the Azara, take it out of the Azara, which is forbidden. So my thought is, I didn't do it, but I'm going to take it out. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that's disqualified. We're going to have a whole long attempt to try to prove it from a pasuk. In the end, we're going to reject it for two reasons and learn it from logic. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar comes and says, we keep seeing him, Rabbi Elazar, Trei Chai K'tivei B'notar. There's two psukim about notar, and we're going to basically say one is unnecessary. Now, it's really not, but we're going to suggest that it's unnecessary. The first is by Korban Pesach. Okay, in general, notar, if you remember, came up in the Torah mainly about, and that's where we got to Pigul, about the shlamim. A regular korban shlamim, you can eat for the day of the sacrifice, the next night, and the next day. And if you leave it till the third day, that's when it becomes notar. But there's a bunch of exceptions to this rule. In fact, there's a lot of exceptions, and we're going to see them right now. So in one pasuk it says, Katuv echad omer lo totiru mimenu abokir. That's the korban pesach. Korban pesach also is a type of shlamim, but korban pesach has to be eaten that night. Okay, the day and the night, right? We don't eat it during the day, though, because Korban Pesach, we wait to eat it at night. It can only be eaten at night. The main thing is not necessarily it can't be eaten that day, but it can't be eaten the next day. You can't leave it over till the morning. V'katuv echad omer lo yaniach mimenu abokir. Just the same thing. Lo totiru means don't leave it over. Lo yaniach, don't leave it. Don't leave it till the morning. Now here it's talking about the Thanksgiving offering, which is also a type of shlamim. So these are two exceptions to the rule of a korban shlamim. It's not really such an unnecessary pasuk, because if you had it by Pesach, you wouldn't necessarily know it was by the Thanksgiving offering. But right now, the Gemara is going to assume this seems to be unnecessary, because we already said lo totir mimenu abokir is another that basically says the same thing. So classic imeno inyan. If it doesn't teach you about lahaniach, that you can't leave it till the morning, because we already know that from the Pesach pasuk. Tineu inyan leinyan machshevet hinuach. Well, what does it say in that pasuk? Don't leave it. So it must be talking about a thought about leaving it, which is exactly the case that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about, right? I have a thought that I'm going to leave it till tomorrow. And lahaniach and yaniach, it's the same root. So that must be talking about a thought relating to leaving it is also going to be disqualifying. And that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Rabbi Yehuda, hi kra lahach. First, we're going to have one major question that we're going to resolve. And then we're going to end with two difficulties that because of those, we're going to have to reject this completely. So in the end, I guess you could say there's three difficulties. But in the end, the first one we will resolve. Rabbi Yehuda haikra lahach Yehuda. Wait a minute. He says the pasuk is coming to teach you this machshevet hinuach, and it's not needed for itself. What do you mean? He needs it for what it says in the following braita. Ubisal zevach todat shlamav. Now that's the pasuk that we're reading now at the yaniach. Okay, let's read the whole pasuk. The meat. Okay, now and the meat. We're going to darshan end in a minute. And the meat of the zevach todat shlamav, of the sacrifice. Zevach often means of the slaughtering. Okay, but it also means of the sacrifice of the toda, the korban toda, the Thanksgiving offering shlamav. It's a type of shlamim. Beyond korbano yachel, it will be eaten the day you bring the sacrifice. Lo yaniach mimenu aboker, and you can't leave it till the morning. So lamadnu litoda shene'echelet liyom v'layla. From here we learn, okay, the first basic halacha: the toda has to be eaten that day, okay, and that night. Where do we learn a chalifin uvladot tvulot minayin? How do we learn that if, let's say, I designated an animal for a korban toda, and then I lost the animal ran away, and I brought a different one instead? That's a chalipin. It's a switched animal. I swapped it out for someone else. So now I have a different animal in its stead. How do I know that the laws are the same for that? You might have thought maybe it's a little bit different because it was just a replacement. Or vladot, if the animal was female and it had offspring, then the offspring has to be brought in the same way the mother is brought, which means, again, it's limited to a day and night. Tmurot, okay, I see you're asking, Becky. Tmura is something else. Tmura, the chalipin is, I lost the animal, and I have no animal now, and I was supposed to bring korban toda. I have to bring another animal. That's allowed. Tmura is not allowed, but it's effective, right? That's always the weird thing about tmura. Tmura means that I want to swap my animal for a different one because I just don't like my animal, or I think I found a nicer one, or I found an uglier one and I want to keep the nicer one for myself. Either which way, tov, ra, tov, it doesn't matter. If I already designate an animal and it's here before me and I want to switch it with another one, I'm not allowed to do that. But if I do it, the second one has sanctity just like the first one. So how do I know that the law of the tmur is going to be exactly the same, that it also once I sacrifice it, it can only be eaten that day and that night? Talmud Lomar, ubisar. So the vav comes to include all those cases. And the basar. Chatapa asham minayin. Now this is classic in Zevachim in general. It's something you might start noticing, a theme, which is, even though Vayikra details out, and if you think about Vayikra, it's so detail-oriented and it tells you exactly what you're supposed to do for all the korbanot, but it's not really true. It doesn't really tell you exactly everything for all the korbanot. There's a lot of details. Even though there's a lot of details, there's a lot of details missing. And they're constantly trying to figure out, well, it didn't say anything about that here. How do we know then? Is it like this? Is it like that? And to what do we compare it? And where do we learn? Right? We saw it with kachata ka'asham. Right? The asham is like the chatat, but in what way is it like the chatat? Right? And which asham? Also the asham mitzorah, or just the asham that's like a sin offering? Right? We had that whole... So this is a big theme. So here they say, now, we have the law for shlamim, third day. We have the law for Toda and Pesach, right? Second day it becomes notar. In other words, again, one can be eaten for 1 day, one can be eaten for 2 days. But it doesn't say about the chatat and asham. So now we're going to darshan the chatat and the asham from this pasuk. How so? Talmud Lomar, zevach, zevach. We said it could either be, right, slaughtering, but here it doesn't really mean slaughtering. So it means sacrifice. It means it includes other sacrifices. What other sacrifices? Presumably chatat and asham. So now, minayin l'rabot shalmei nazir v'shalmei pesach. Now, how do we know that the shlamim of a nazir, okay, which again, it's an exception to the rule. The nazir brings shlamim with his korbanot or her korbanot when they finish the process of being a nazir. There's 3 korbanot they bring. One is a shlamim. It's also limited in time, and the pesach. I don't know why you need a pasuk for the pesach because we already learned it by itself. But anyway, they just clump these two together. Talmud Lomar shlamav. Because it called it Todat Shlamav, and it says Shlamim in plural, it must be there's 2 Shlamim that are also like this. So here maybe it's not, it teaches you Pesach, but it does tell you there's 2 Shlamim just like this, which is Nazir and Pesach, because in Pesach you could learn from its own pasuk. Lachmei Toda b'chalot rikikim shebenazir minayin. Now the Toda offering and the Nazir offering both come with a slew of breads that go with it. So how do we know that these breads also have to be eaten in the same time frame? Talmud Lomar, korbano. Korbano is the thing you bring, like a korban, you bring it to God. Other things that are brought to God besides just the animal, not just the basar that was said earlier, also the korbano, those also can only be eaten within that time frame. Kulam ani koreh behem lo yaniach. Okay, all those, the word lo yaniach refers to that. It can't be left till the morning. Okay, so how can Rabbi Yehuda possibly say this is unnecessary? This is clearly necessary. We just learned a million halachot from here. Im ken lemakra lo totiru my lo yaniach imeno inyan leinuach tinei inyan lemachshavet inuach. It's not the fact that the pasuk is there. It's the wording, the language used in the pasuk. It could have said just like by Pesach, lo totiru. Lo totiru means don't leave it over. Lo yaniach is don't place it. Now, what do we learn from here? The fact that they use the language of yaniach teaches you that that's unnecessary. In other words, the fact that it talked about leaving it over till the morning, that would have had, that we needed. But the fact that they worded it, just like we had lo yiga and lo yochal, right? It worded it in lo yiga, even though it really meant lo yochal. From there we learned two things. So from here we learn also machshavet hinuach, because it didn't have to use the word yaniach. It could have used yotil, okay, or totiru. So the fact that it says yaniach comes to teach you that if you have a thought about leaving it beyond its time, that would be a problem. Because remember, the pasuk's talking about time. So if you leave it beyond its time, you have a thought about, I'm going to leave it beyond its time, that will also disqualify it. Now, I told you, though, we're going to reject it. Because, first of all, it's only a partial answer. Hatinach lahaniach. I understand that makes sense about the part that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the rabbis about. If you have a thought, I'm going to leave it till tomorrow. But if you remember, there's two things he says disqualify a korban. Lehotzi chutz lachutz. If you have a thought, I'm going to take the blood outside, but you didn't think I'm going to sacrifice it, I'm going to put it on the altar outside. You just thought, right, or I'm going to eat it outside the place I'm allowed to eat it. You didn't say eating. You just had a thought, I'm going to take it outside. Well, that doesn't come from this pasuk, because this pasuk has nothing to do with outside its place. It only has to do with outside of time. So how are you going to learn the hotzimi here? Ma'ika lememar. Ve'od. And secondly, if we didn't have a problem with particularly what he says, it's a problem because in a different braita, it says, or in a braita, it says that Rabbi Yehuda's, it says exactly what Rabbi Yehuda gets it from, and it says it's a logical argument. Okay? That's what we're going to read right now. Ve'od, second problem, Tama de Rabbi Yehuda svarahu. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda's it's a svara. He has a logical reasoning. How do we know? Tanya, as it says in a braita. Amar lehem Rabbi Yehuda. Now this braita says that there was a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis about this. It wasn't just they argued pasul kasher, but Rabbi Yehuda said, listen, you're wrong because blah, blah, blah. Now listen to what he says. Now, your machshava is, if I leave the blood till tomorrow, right, that's your machshava. Comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says, what if you really, right, it wasn't just a machshava, you left it till tomorrow. Would the korban be disqualified? If I left the blood till tomorrow, would I disqualify the korban? Absolutely. Now, this is a little tricky, because if I leave the meat, it's not disqualified, okay? It's notar, I can't eat it. But it actually doesn't retroactively disqualify the korban. But, okay, even though we did see there was an opinion that maybe said that that's how we read the pasuk about pigul, but leaving that aside. He says, since if I left the blood till tomorrow, and I didn't put it on the altar tomorrow, I just left it. That would completely disqualify the korban. Why? Because the blood has to be spilled that I poured on the mizbeach that day. You don't take care of it that day, you disqualify the korban. Without the blood, it's nothing, and the blood can't be brought the next day. And right, it's psulina. If you remember, you leave it overnight, that's disqualifying. So, since if I actually were to leave it till tomorrow, it would disqualify it. Therefore, a thought to leave it over would disqualify it. And the same thing for chutz l'mkomo. If I were to take the blood out of the azara, the minute I take it out, it's disqualified. So therefore, a thought to take it out should also disqualify it, because basically those things go hand in hand. Okay, that's his logic. And therefore, they conclude, Ela tamat Rabbi Yehuda svarahu. So besides learning the Mishna today, so far all we did was prove what's Rabbi Yehuda's logic. We thought it was, the basis for his opinion was a pasuk. In the end, even though we resolved the first difficulty with it, we then added two more difficulties. It doesn't help you with chutz l'mkomo. And Rabbi Yehuda himself says in a braita that it's a logical reasoning. So we go with logical reasoning, which then resolves question number one about chutz l'mkomo also would be included in that logic. Now the Gemara is going to go off because of this on a question, which is a bit of a strange question, but maybe not so strange. But niflog dami Rabbi Yehuda b'kulu. If it's all logic, that if you were to do it, it would disqualify the offering, and therefore a thought to do something that disqualifies the offering disqualifies it, well, then all the other cases in the Mishna, Rabbi Yehuda should disagree as well, and he doesn't. Okay, now it's a little bit strange he says this, because let's say lamala lamata, we already know that doesn't disqualify the offering. Okay, but the assumption is, if you were to do it, it would be wrong, and therefore, a thought to do it should also be wrong and should be disqualified. So the Gemara kind of counters it with a question back, saying, Behei niflo, which one were you suggesting exactly? And they're going to basically go through 5 arguments, like 5 cases, or like 2 put together, because they're kind of one and the same, and go through almost all the cases in the Mishnah and say, in none of these would the offering be disqualified. Or in one of them, they're going to explain it a little bit differently, okay? And basically explain there's no real place for the question, okay? This is the way to answer the question, by saying there's really no other parallel case where it really would have been disqualified, where the sacrifice would have been disqualified by actually doing that action, okay? So we'll go through one by one. Shover, or 2 by 2. Shover atzmot ha-pesach v'lechol mimenu na. Okay, these are 2 cases, but they're really one and the same. If you have a thought that you're going to break the bones on Pesach, the Korban Pesach, or eat it raw, zichro gufei mimifsal. Okay, now it's forbidden to break the bones, and it's forbidden to eat the meat not roasted, raw. But if you did it, it doesn't disqualify the Korban. You've done something wrong. You got punished for it, right? You've transgressed a negative prohibition, but okay, I'm not sure if eating it raw is a negative, but whatever. You've done something wrong, but it doesn't disqualify the Korban. So that's why a machshava about it then also wouldn't disqualify the Korban. Okay, next. Al menach yochlu tmeim v'shikruvu tmeim. Okay, and then we're going to go to the arelim, which is really one and the same. Okay, zivcha gufei mimifsal. Shiklu arelim, shikruvu arelim, zivcha gufei mimifsal. Okay, if a tamei person eats it, or an arel eats it, it's not going to ruin the Korban at this point, okay? Or if they burn the parts on the altar. Remember, the 4 main avodot were done. They're not going to disqualify the offering by doing this. So if you have some thought, they're going to do it. It doesn't ruin it. So that's what, right? So that's why your thought is not going to ruin it either. Because if they actually would do it, it wouldn't ruin it. Lishnachrina, this one has a second explanation. This is what I told you before. Kol kamine. Kol kamine means what? You have the power to do this? This is what I said before. Rashi says it well. Okay, let's look at Rashi. Lishnachrina kol kamine. Mi yishmalo lahakrivo bepasul. Who would listen to this person? Yana machshava that some tamei person's going to eat it or sacrifice it. HaKohanim tmeim lo yishma'u lo, right? The Kohanim or tmeim are definitely not going to listen to him. V'chein arelim lakriv lo mizbeach ba'avera. What, they're going to bring it on the altar and burn it, right? As when they're prohibited. O le'echol kodesh ba'avera, right? They're not going to eat sanctified items in sin. Hilkach em machshavto machshava b'davar taloi ba'achirim. Okay, Rashi words it very nicely. He says their machshava is not a machshava because it's dependent on other people and other people who likely won't collaborate with him on this. So therefore, it's not a machshava that's really, it doesn't have a lot of weight to it. Okay, this is a different answer than the others of, it's not even pasul. Number 3. La'arev damam b'dam psulim. To mix the blood, right? If you have a thought, we're going to mix the blood with disqualified blood. Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei da'amar ein dam mevatel dam. Remember, he says blood doesn't nullify other blood. Min b'mino eino batel. It's the same type. They're not going to nullify it. And therefore, you actually could bring it on the altar because it does have the kosher blood mixed in. And it's not nullified in the non-qualified blood. Right, you put it in the wrong place on the altar. Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember, we had this whole sugya. What do we learn? The Rabbi Yehuda himself says he holds by those who say that putting it in the wrong place in the altar is still considered as if it was in the right place. Any place on the altar is mikomo, and therefore it's not disqualified at all. This is the one that's a little more complicated, the 5th and the last one in this slew of questions. V'liflog b'nitanim b'fnim shenitanam b'chutz, v'nitanim b'chutz shenitanam b'fnim. Okay, the real one here is if I take the blood from outside, it's supposed to go on the outer altar, and I bring it in the inner altar. Do you remember that if you bring the blood inside, right, any blood that goes inside, there was a debate which blood, maybe only the sin offering, but let's go with the sin offering. You take the blood of the sin offering and you bring it inside and you put it on the inner altar, the blood that's not supposed, right, a regular sin offering, which is supposed to be outside. And you bring it on the altar inside. What happens? Disqualified. Okay? So, you get punished for doing that. So now they're going to say, well, then theoretically you disqualify the offering, and since you disqualify the offering, so Rabbi Yehuda should have disagreed then and said a machshava to do this should also disqualify it. To which they answer, Kasava Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that in order for it to be pigul, a psul machshava, it has to be, we saw this already a few dapim ago, Be'ina makom she'em mishulash b'dam b'vasaro b'imurim. They darshan that yom shlishi, and they say shlishi has to be a three-pronged, okay, that there's a place that has three things could take place there, meaning the blood could be placed there, the meat could be placed there, and the imurim could be burnt there. Okay, now, when are you going to have a place where you could put the blood, you can eat the meat, and burn the imurim? Well, you can't have that in the hechal, in the sanctuary. The only thing you can do in the sanctuary is put the blood. You can't eat the meat there. No one eats in the sanctuary. And you can't burn the meat there. You didn't use the mizbeach inside for burning meat. It was for burning incense, and it was for putting blood. So there's no pigul unless it has those three things to it. Now, where does it have that? Don't all those things have to happen in the Azara? And we need a chutzim komo outside the Azara. Well, in the time when they were bamot and you were allowed to sacrifice outside the temple, then you could actually bring outside the temple, you could both put the blood on the altar, you could burn the parts on the altar, and you could eat the meat. So that would be a case, and that's where pigul is only outside the Azara, not in the inner sanctuary. Okay, so that's why this case actually can't have pigul. So while it could disqualify the offering if you actually did it, this is different than the other cases, it actually, though, can't be pigul because it's missing one of the criteria for pigul, which is this threesome that you need to be. To which the Gemara answers, does he really hold it has to be mishulash, bedam bebasar b'murim? Umi ilay Rabbi Yehuda haisfaros. This is a side question. We answered it by saying he holds this mishulash thing. It needs all three. And that's why. But does he really hold that? Look at this braita. V'hatanya. Rabbi Yehuda, same person, omeo. Tavalha. Okay, let's read this pasuk. This is a pasuk in Dvarim Yud Zayin, verse 1. Lo tizbach l'Hashem Elokecha shor v'seh. Don't bring a korban, like one kind of animal. Asher yeh bo mum. It's a blemished animal. Kol davar ra. Any bad thing. Now this seems to be adding something, right? Already a blemish is a bad thing, so why did it say any bad thing? So davar ra ribakan. It added two halachot, this davar ra. What did it add? Number one, chata shechata b'darom. Okay, the sin offering has to be slaughtered in the north. If you slaughter it in the south, that's a davar ra. Okay, it's like putting a blemished animal, meaning disqualifies the offering. And chatat shenechanas dama lifnim psula. And a chatat that you bring its blood inside is psula. Now they don't mean the chatat, they mean a thought about the chatat, even though it doesn't say that. They obviously mean a thought. Why? Because lo tizbach, I told you before, zevach usually means sacrificing. Lo tizbach is don't slaughter. Don't slaughter. Now you can't slaughter, and when you slaughter, you don't bring the blood inside. So what does it mean? It means when you're slaughtering, and then you have a thought that you're going to bring the blood of the chatat inside, that disqualifies the korban. So here you see, it's a thought about bringing the blood inside does disqualify. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda doesn't require this threesome, because he says inside the echal it will be disqualified. So they say, okay, so now it seems like Rabbi Yehuda holds that we don't have this shlishi thing. To which the Gemara counters by saying, what do you mean? Right now we're going to get very confused because we thought to answer the question against Rabbi Yehuda, we had to say he holds by that you need the three, and that's why in the hechal is not disqualified. I thought about it. Then we brought a source that says it is disqualified in the hechal. A thought about bringing the blood into the wrong place in the hechal would be disqualified. But then we say, what do you mean? The leile Rabbi Yehuda shlishi, but we see from a Mishna that Rabbi Yehuda does hold that you need the three and that it wouldn't be disqualified. So now it's going to be super confusing, although they have a very easy answer. V'hatnan, here's the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, hichnis b'shogeg kasher, habamezi pasul. Okay, this isn't going to be so easy to understand how they get there, but let's go part by part. If you bring, this is actually bringing, not thought. We keep wavering between, right, we're going zigzagging back and forth between actually doing and thinking. If you bring the blood inside by accident, the blood that's supposed to be outside, bring it to the echal by accident, the Mishnah says, kasher. The korban's not disqualified. What do you see from here, though? What can you infer? Habamezid pasul. If you brought it in with intention, it would be disqualified. Now, the kaimalan, now this Mishnah was explained that it's bisheki peel. Only, now, it sounds like if you just bring the blood into the sanctuary, it's disqualified. But it's not. It's only if you actually put it on the altar. You had to have taken the blood from the sin offering that was supposed to be done outside, brought it in, put it on the altar. That's when it disqualifies the korban. Now, let's do back to machshava then. Could you possibly say then a thought to put the blood on the altar would disqualify it? Of course not, because a thought is just a thought. If when you actually bring it in, it's not disqualified until you actually put it on the altar, then of course a thought is not going to disqualify because you didn't put anything on the altar. So of course it can't disqualify the korban. In order to disqualify it, as you're going to actually physically put on the altar. So they're going to say right now, so hashtu, hatam, aile, ikiper ini, lo kiper lo. There you actually brought it in physically to the echal, and it's still not disqualified unless you put it on the altar. Here you just have a thought, lo koshket, of course it won't be disqualified. So it sounds like he doesn't disqualify in the echal, presumably because he holds by shlishi, this mishulash, these three things. So now we're very confused. We tried to answer by saying he holds by this threesome thing, and Heichal is not disqualified. We brought a brayta that said Heichal is disqualified according to him. We brought another Mishna that seems to infer Heichal is not. Okay, what do we do now? Very simply, Trei Tanai v'alibid Rabbi Yehuda. There's two Tanaitic opinions about what Rabbi Yehuda thought. One thought he disqualified in the Heichal, one thought he didn't. And in order to answer our question, we brought the side that says he didn't think it was disqualified. Remember, this was all to explain why he doesn't argue in the Mishnah about the case where the blood was brought inside and say, oh, well, if it would have been disqualified if you brought it in, then it should be disqualified by just having a thought about it. And he didn't say that because he didn't hold that. Okay? V'sava Rabbi Yehuda. Now we have one more question about this. And this is a total side question. In that brayta we brought that we then said, oh, must be some other understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. There were two exceptions. Davar Ra, right, included two cases. And this thought you had about bringing the blood inside. So, Savar Rabbi Yehuda Yehi chayav. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet. Does he really hold that if you slaughtered it on the south instead of on the north side of the Azara, you disqualify the korban? V'hatanya. It says in a brayta, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yachol chatat shechata b'darom yeh chayav. You might have thought you'd be chayav, meaning you get lashes, and presumably the lashes go together with, it'll be disqualified. Talmud Lamal. Now we're going back to that pasuk we said, Lo tizbach l'Hashem elokecha shor b'seh, etc. Kol davar ra. Al davar ra atam chayvo. For doing something evil, you get punished. But if you put it in the wrong side of the azarat, that's not an evil thing. That's not right. Putting a blemished animal on the altar, you could maybe call evil. But you can't call doing it the wrong side of the azarat. It's not exactly an evil thing to do. Right? It's not a terrible thing to do. And therefore, you're not liable lashes. So that disagrees with the brayta who said it actually called avara includes this case. And here we said it excludes. So again, Trei Tanai, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, there was two different Tanaim, which actually goes with exactly what we said. That whole brayta, both those cases, were said by one Tana's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, but there's a complete opposite understanding of what Rabbi Yehuda said. And this is often what happens with the transmission of our traditions. Sometimes people get confused with which side of the argument he was on. Okay, Amar Rabbi Abba. So this was all of this was just to understand Rabbi Yehuda's position in the Mishnah. The first part was understanding what's its source. The second part, and this is my summary for the first part for now, we won't summarize at the end. And then we tried from a pasuk, in the end we got to logic. Then we said, well, with that logic, he should have disagreed with all the cases in the Mishnah. And then we said, well, which ones are you talking about? And went one by one through almost all the cases and basically said the logic wouldn't apply here. Okay? Either because they wouldn't have been disqualified if he would have actually done them, which was his whole logic, or each one had its own, right? Some of them had their own unique explanations. This part, till we get to the end of the chapter, is going to be three statements. One by Rabbi Abba, one by Rav Chisda, another by Rav Chisda, mostly relating to our topic, some a little off, but a little off to the side. But they're all going to have the same structure. Someone's going to say a statement. Rava is going to try in a very weird, not so understandable logic to try to prove, oh, this is right. And then the Gemara is going to say that's not good logic, what Rava is saying. Okay, it's not a good explanation. And then the first one, we're actually going to have then a contradiction, like a source that's brought to contradict what he said, this Rabbi Abba said, and then we're going to end with, yeah, that's difficult. I'm a Rabbi Abba. Umodeh Rabbi Yehuda shechozer v'kavol l'pigul. This is going to be a good review of some halachot we learned about pigul. If you remember, pigul is not going to kick in terms of karet. Anyway, if you eat the meat being karet, you'll get karet. It's not going to happen if there's some other reason the korban is disqualified. So while Rabbi Yehuda disqualifies this korban and says, if you say I'm going to leave it till tomorrow, it's pigul. However, if after, okay, he's modeh, he agrees with the rabbi, shechozer v'kavol lepigul, that if after having this thought, which theoretically disqualified the offering, you then have an actual pigul thought that everyone will agree is pigul, you say, I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, it is pigul. Even though theoretically you disqualified it already, and once it's disqualified, pigul doesn't kick in and it's not karet, in this case you would get karet for eating the meat. Okay? So, I'm a Rava. Rava tries to prove this in a very difficult way to understand. Okay, his logic, something, is flawed with the logic. Shita Mekubetza tries to explain some other way because he says clearly can't be the Rava saying what's simple because it doesn't make any sense. But we're going to go with it anyway, the simple reading, and then we'll see how the Gemara clearly rejects it. I'm a Rava Teda. Here, I'll prove it to you because Pigul Lifnei Zrika Lo Klumhu. Pigul, another thing we learned about Pigul. Pigul, again, you could have a machshava, mefagel ruins the korban. But when does karet kick in? When you eat the meat, right? If you eat the meat of that disqualified korban, it's pigul and you get karet. But only if you actually did everything else the way you were supposed to, meaning you sprinkled the blood, even though you're not supposed to sprinkle the blood because you disqualified the offering already. So it's only going to be karet if you eat the meat after the blood was sprinkled on the altar the way it was supposed to be on that day, on the day it was supposed to. So that means pigul before zrika is nothing. Okay, which means at zrika v'kavala b'pigul. So if you have this timeline, and first you thought, I'm going to leave it till tomorrow, and then you said, I'm actually going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, and then you sprinkle the blood today. So when you sprinkle the blood, that's when pigul kicks in. So it goes back to the machshava you just had, and it ignores the first one. That's kind of what he's saying, although it makes no sense because then chutz and kamo and pigul also should then be karet. And that's the problem here. So anyway, the Gemara says, Velohi, this isn't true because hatam hu chada machshavi. There, in a regular case of pigul where you have thought, I'm going to sprinkle the blood after the time, and then you sprinkle the blood today, pigul kicks in. But that's because there was only one machshava that disqualified it. Ha tre machshavot. Here you have two. You have one that's I'm going to leave it till tomorrow, and then one I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow. So completely reject the logic here. Eitive Rav Huna Rabbi Abba. So Rav Huna questions Rabbi Abba from the following source. So first we had a logical explanation for Rabbi Abba and rejected the logic. Now we're going to have a difficulty. This is the source we saw already. If you have a thought, I'm going to put the ones up below and ones below up. But I'm going to do it all today. It's fine. It's not disqualified because we said already that's not a disqualification. And therefore, so if after that you have a pigul b'chshava, since the first one wasn't a disqualifying one, so the next one will actually create a pigul situation. So again, if it's chutz l'kamo, it'll be disqualified without karet. If it's chutz l'zmano, outside its time, right? I'm going to put the blood on the altar outside its time or burn the offering outside its time, then you'll be chayav karet. But this is the key. Limachal, if you say tomorrow I'm going to put it in the wrong place on the altar, pasul, right? Then it will be disqualified. But if after you said tomorrow I'm going to put it the ones that were supposed to go below above, then chazar v'chishev ben chutz l'mazo ben chutz l'mkomo pasul ve'en bo karet. Okay, and then you did that, right? A pigul machshava. In that case, since you already said I'm going to do it tomorrow, now to put the blood in the wrong place on the altar tomorrow is kind of like I'm leaving it till tomorrow because it's not a disqualifying action, the putting it in the wrong, right? But you are saying tomorrow. So anyway, they say this is like saying I'm going to leave it till tomorrow. So what do you see here? Pasul, and there's no karet when you then do have a pigul machshava. So that's like our case of lahaniach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that would disqualify it, and right, and then pigul. So tiyufta to Rabbi Abba tiyufta. This is actually a good knockout of Rabbi Abba's statement. Now we get to the first statement of Rav Chisda. There's two of them. And again, Rav is going to try to prove it, and we're going to reject Rav's logic. I'm a Rav Chisda, I'm a Ravina Barsila. If you have a thought that impure people are going to eat it tomorrow, you're chayav, meaning it's a pigul machshava, because your machshava was someone's going to eat it tomorrow, even though the person who was going to eat it is disqualified. So I'm a Rava, right? You would think maybe, well, there's two disqualifications going on here. So Rava says, Teda. This isn't really two disqualifications. Why? Because anytime you say chutz l'zmano, there's two disqualifications. Why? Because when you say, I'm going to eat it tomorrow, okay, you can't eat it at the moment you say that, because I'm slaughtering the meat and I say, right, I'm going to, no, between the time of slaughtering to sprinkling the blood, you can't eat it anyway. No one can eat the meat then. So it's like saying someone who can't eat it will eat it. So it's got two problems. Someone who can't eat it will eat it, and they're going to eat it beyond the time. So that's no different than this. Someone who's tameh will eat it, who can't eat it, and it's going to be beyond the time. So basically, it's the same thing. Therefore, that one's pasul or regular. That's your classic chutzas mano. I'm going to eat it tomorrow when right now I can't eat it. But obviously, this is not the same because the lohi hatam zariku mechaze hacha lo mechaze klal. Well, I can't eat the meat right now because the blood hasn't been sprinkled, but I can eat it tomorrow. In other words, in theory, like there's nothing, or once the blood is sprinkled, I can eat it. I can't eat it tomorrow, but I can eat it now. And I can't eat it now, but I will be allowed to eat it. Whereas a tameh person will not be allowed to eat it at all. So therefore, those are two different things, and you can't learn from one to the other. Amar Rav Chisda, third statement. Margala b'pumei de Rav Dimi bar Chinina. Okay, this is a pearl in the mouth of Rav Dimi bar Chinina. I don't know why I thought this was the greatest thing, but that's what he says about this statement. Basar Pesach shelo hutzlav v'lachmei todah shelo hurmu chayavim alehem mishum tum'ah. If this Pesach that's not valid for eating because you didn't roast it, or you brought the korban todah and you didn't bring the breads with it, also you can't eat the meat of the korban. Chayavim alehem mishum tum'ah. If someone who was tameh ate them, it's a problem. Oh, actually, no. Lachmei todah shelo hurmu. My mistake. You didn't take the truma from them. You're supposed to give part of them to the kohen, basically, and you didn't take from them to the kohen. So they're not allowed to be eaten. But if a tameh person eats it, he's liable for eating it because he's tameh. This is, again, the same kind of thing. There's two problems. No one can eat it, and in addition, a tameh person ate it, and it's still going to be a problem. A rabbi, right? This is like the double disqualification of pigul. Once it's disqualified for some other reason, it's not really pigul. But here we're going to say it is. It's a problem of tumah, even though no one can eat it anyway. Rava Teda, I'll prove it from this. Ditanya, it says in a Braita, Asher la Hashem. Okay, this is the pasuk. Nefesh asher tochal mi basar zevach hashlamim asher la Hashem v'tumato alav. It's the pasuk. If you eat shlamim when you're tameh, you're going to get karet. So, well, why does it say Asher la Hashem? So Asher la Hashem l'rabot imurei kodshim kalim l'tumah. Now, shlamim generally you eat the meat, but what part goes to God? Asher la Hashem. That's the imurim, the parts that get burnt on the altar. So they say here, the parts that get burned on the altar that no one eats anyway are forbidden also for a tameh person. That's what those words are including. So what do you see here? Even though you don't eat those parts, you're still liable for tumah. Likewise, hachanami, same thing with this Pesach. Afal, right, that wasn't done properly, or the lachmei todah that weren't done properly. Right, even though you don't eat them, you're chayav mishum tumah. Even though you can't eat them. But again, we're going to reject this logic. Velohi, there's a difference, a big difference. Hatam imurei kodshim kalim chazu legavoa. The imurim, while they might be disqualified for eating, they're qualified to be burned on the altar. They have some purpose. They're not ruined, so to speak. But there's nothing to do with these. These are problematic completely. You didn't roast it. You didn't take the stuff to give to the kohen. They're completely disqualified. You can't put them on the altar. You can't eat them. So they're totally useless, which means maybe you can't prove from there then that a tameh person who does it will get punished. Okay, this lishana achrina, the Bach takes it out completely, and it's really saying the same thing, just in other words, so we're going to skip it. Okay, so what we did the second part of this, okay, with that, Hadran alach kol hapsulim, we finished the third chapter. This section, okay, after we finished proving Rabbi Yehuda and then dealing with all the side problems with it, so then we had these three statements that connect somewhat, where there's a double pasul here. Okay, he kind of built off of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that one's pasul, but if it's a double pasul there, it's actually not pasul. Okay, because it still could be pigul. We don't kind of view it as a complete disqualification, that it ruins the potential to become pigul. And then from there we talked about, double problems. Tmeim lemachal, tmeim for eating something that no one can eat. Okay, but each time we had some sort of proof for Rava and then rejected it. Okay, we're going to read the next Mishna. Beit Shammai and Raymond, that's where we'll end today. Now we're moving on, it looks like, to a new topic, but we're still going to connect this all to pigul, and it's clear that this Mishnah is being brought to read it with the prism, with the glasses of pigul. So what we're talking here is there's placements, you put things on the mizbeach, okay, when you pour the blood on the altar, which could be placed, could be poured all different ways. We're going to talk about all this later, but there's different rules for different korbanot, how many placings there are. Is it 1, is it 2, is it 4? Okay, different kinds of rules for different korbanot. and difference between the ones inside and the ones in the outer altar. Okay, the outer altar is the main one. The inner one is just a few korbanot go, like the Purim and Israfim and like those kinds of exceptions. So now, Beit Shammai Omrim, Kol hanitanim al mizbeach hachitzon. So first we start with the outer altar. All the blood placements that go on the outer altar, shenatam b'matana achat kiper. You achieve your atonement with just one placement. Even if the rules are more, one is sufficient. That's all you need, and you've gotten atonement. Bechatat shtei matanot. There's only one exception to the rule of all the ones done in the outer altar, the sin offering. There you need two, minimum. Beit Hillel omrim av chataot shenetana matana achat kiper. He says all of them on the outside mizbeach, one is enough, even the sin offering. Lefichach, here comes the big rule. And here we're going to see why this has to do with pigul. Im natana tarishona ketikna. If you did the first one properly, et hashniya chutz lezmana, and then the second one you did with this thought, I'm going to burn the meat outside of its time or eat the meat outside of its time, kiper, it's totally fine because you already did the first one and you completed your obligation. So the second one you ruined, but it doesn't matter. It's kind of too late. And likewise, the reverse. What if you have this combo, which usually we say it's not pigul, right? You don't get karet for it because you did also chutz l'zmano and also chutz l'koma. But since the second one was chutz l'koma and the first one you already finished, so to speak, because that was the only essential part, pigul v'chayavim alav karet. You do get karet for the first machshava, which was chutz l'zmana, because that's as if it was a complete action. Last part for today. What about the inner altar? There you have to do the exact amount that it says. Any less, you don't get atonement. Now this is going to cause something else. There's something called mefaglim b'chatzi matir. Remember, pigul happens only when you have a machshava, when it's something that's permitting something else. So the sprinkling of the blood is permitting the meat to be eaten and the meat to be the parts that get burned on the altar to be burned on the altar. Now, if you're in the inner altar, this actually doesn't allow any meat to be eaten. They're always burned. But you're allowing the next stage to happen, which is the burning of the meat. Now, if you, and the burning of the parts that go burnt on the altar. Now, if you forgot any of them, you don't get kapara. Therefore, lefichach, natan kulan kitiknan, ve'echat shelo kitiknan. Let's say you had to do 4, and you did 3 totally fine, and 1 not fine. Psula ve'ein bo karet. This is not pigul of karet. Why? Because there's no emefaglim bechatzi matir. There's no pigul when you only did it during a partial permitting. Now, since you needed all 4 and you only had the pigul thought during 1, it's not actually pigul that has karet. It does disqualify the offering, but it's not pigul. Okay, so that was what we had in this Mishna, and with this we're going to end. Wishing everyone a good day. We should have b'sorot tovot. Again, not another complicated day yesterday, and wishing good news for today.